Welcome into this unconference session.
So maybe you had a look in your app and it says premises and promises of code review, but we noticed that you couldn't see what kind of session this is, because this is not your typical conference session, because none of us are speakers, or we are all speakers. This is an open space discussion, which means that you are going to interact with all of us. So that means that we start with eight people, maybe less, because we will see. And they will sit here, and they will start a discussion. We will provide some topics. Of course, it's all about code review. And if you want to join the discussion, you come to the front, you select one of the persons here, you say, I'm going to claim your chair, and then you switch, and then you continue with the discussion. So it is really, really interactive. It is the first time they do it here at JFL, so you will all be part of this. It's not really an experiment, because we've done it on other conferences as well. This also means that you are also responsible for the quality of this session, which means, in the end, it should be 5 stars, of course, because you are responsible for the quality. Yes, so once you sit here and you want to say something, just ask for the microphone. We have 2 microphones, so people can debate with each other and just try to claim. So first, we need 8 volunteers that have a strong opinion about code review. So please come to the front. Otherwise, we are going to pick some people. I don't have problems with that. Don't be shy.
There are.
So that means also that during the session, people will probably need to go in front of you. So please make space for those kinds of people.
Who ever heard of a software engineer having strong opinions, right?
5. So this is also the moment if you think, well, this is not really the session I was hoping for. You can now leave. Please don't go away with just giving us 1 star. Okay. And I will take this seat.
This looks gezellig. So, why code reviews? If you ask me, there is this is a big omission in trainings, in education, formal education, in onboardings. We don't really talk. We just assume that, yeah, everybody knows how to do it. But I think this has the result that everybody has a different experiences. There are people that love it, there are people that hate it, and there are people that love or hate it with specific people, and so on. So this is what we want to start a discussion here about. Just some ideas. We have the promises of the code reviews. What are you trying to achieve with a code review? How is it contributing to the software or to your self-development? When is a code review a positive experience and when not? And whatever else you come up with. And the premises from your experiences, best practices, things to avoid, tips and tricks, replacements if we have achieved a goal in a different way. Anything. It's really up to all of you. Just some food for thought to start the discussion. So let's discuss.
Is it on? Yes. Well, I'll just start then. One thing I want to put out is that for me, there's 2 main goals for code reviews. One is to learn, and one is to ensure that the quality of your program only goes up and never goes down.
I'd like to respond to the quality part. I feel like it should be fit to need, so it can also go down, and that would be fine in specific purposes. Like you could over-engineer something to have a very high quality for thousands of users and have 10 users use it, and that would be a pity, right? So I think a code review can also reduce quality.
think the definition of quality is a difficult one in this case. I would never over-engineer something that's only going to be used by 10 users in its lifetime, because then I think, well, if it's a complex construct which is very nice from a coding perspective, it's actually not fit for purpose. So I would agree.
In that case, you can say that the quality is not really quality, but you should keep the code as simple as possible. And if it's like too complex, then it's like too complex, and you should make it more simple.
What I think is that it's important that on forehand you know what you're coding, so that you also know on forehand to what rules and best practices are wanted in the code, or so that you code knowing on forehand what you need to achieve, so that the reviewer doesn't come up with things that you think, oh yeah, but I didn't know that on forehand. So that it's a bit difficult maybe.
I agree with that, because I think before you review, you need some reference. What to review and what is. Otherwise, you have a lot of discussions about this is good, this is not good, this is quality, very good, and so on. I think before you start reviewing, you must have a common ground about what is good code and what are the best practices and so on. And during the review, is you talk with each other and you mention to that reference. Otherwise, it will be a very, very hard discussion.
I like to react on that one. I think that a good outcome of a code review is to have a dialogue together and to find that common ground on what is good quality, what is important in our code, what makes code readable and maintainable. Do we understand each other in what we are delivering as code? And so it's not per se that you start with that common ground, but it can be the outcome of your code reviews.
One of the things with code reviews is that the code is already made. So having a big fundamental discussion about how maybe the setup of your code is, like the object model or whatever you're doing. If you say we have I find it that it should be in a different way, that can mean a big step in refactoring and a lot of time that needs to be spent. I mean, if you have just like a comment on one line and you say, oh, I want it like this or like that, yeah, sure, it's easy to adapt, but changing a fundamental thing, how things are implemented, that can be more difficult and time consuming for that.
One remark about that one. Code review is always in the end of the process or before testing, and there can be some kind of process. Programmers say, well, hurry, because I need to code fast. And there's also something, then you must be able to say, well, hold on, I'm going to refactor my entire code because then it will be better.
I think that what you mean, I want to respond about that, because if you have the discussion afterwards, I think it's too late. Before you start encoding, I think you must have a brainstorm session or a session where you draw the big picture, and then the code review is nothing more than verifying if it's according that design session and also against that reference that you agreed on. Otherwise, if you have at the end a big discussion, then you must rewrite your whole code. And that's, I think, in my opinion, that's much late, too late.
I want to maybe steer the discussion in a little bit of a different direction, because I hear a lot of it, it's in the end, it's in the end, it's in the end. But you can perfectly do code reviews at the beginning of your development cycle. You can build like a very small prototype. I think I'm going to solve it like this. Create a pull request saying, well, it's not ready for merge, but can you please look at it? I don't necessarily see code reviews only as the pull request review for when it's going to merge. I think it can be a continuous process.
I was going to say exactly that. I think an early review is one of the best practices that we should strive for, and I think it helps with avoiding big design upfront situations. And a very long refinement it usually cuts that time down as well.
Okay. You can still join the discussion, you know that, right? So please come to the front, select somebody. No, really, come. Oh, even two.
Nothing personal.
You can pick anyone.
Yeah. Don't pick me. I haven't said
Okay.
I haven't said anything yet.
So what are you? No, that's not how it works. You just pick somebody and that one has to leave. And that person can come back, of course. Yes? So in the end, what are you reviewing? So I think that's very important. For me, for instance, naming is very important. Does the method has a clear name? Does it do what the method does? So those kinds of things. I'm not interested really in the functionality because you have unit tests for verifying that, right? No? Okay.
Not really, I think. It's more than that. Two things I didn't hear yet. I think review is more than code review alone. It might be a bit side topic. That's one thing. And the other thing I didn't hear yet is definition of done. We've got a definition of done in our project. We just look at the points in there and see if it's all satisfied, really. So it's more than code. It's also, is documentation all right? Is it, do you need to write a manual? Is the design okay? Yeah, it's more than only code.
Yeah. To continue your story, I think the code review should be about naming, but it should not be about style issues, because you have automatic tools to have the style, and also some bugs can be detected already automatically. So preferable those things you should not see in your code review, but they should already be catched by automatic tools. My other point is that I think it starts with having good developers. Nothing beats good developers, because the worse your developers are, the more time you need to do code reviews. So I think that's a starting point. And if you have good developers, they understand what your style guides are, what good programming practices are, and then the code reviews can be very brief, because you can have kind of small structural changes, because most of the time the good developers understand what the idea is of the overall program and don't make structural mistakes.
You also mentioned at some point that you would expect testing to be already done. That's not something you take care of in a review, but I think that's also equally important, because then the quality of the test could maybe even be improved during a review. Maybe the person testing might have missed something, right? It's also possible.
When I comment about the training of the developers, by giving a code review, you can train your younger developers and give them feedback and get a dialogue, and so then they will become better developers gradually.
The thing about reviews is also the small things for me are like naming, because you can change that easily. It's not it's you can just refactor a method name or things like that. But so if you're reviewing, okay, does it do what it's supposed to do? The unit tests are often made by the developer. So the unit tests, of course, they will succeed, and of course they will maybe have a certain amount of coverage. But does it actually do what the question was in the functional design or the use case that you were appointed to? That's also something you yeah. But that's really hard to to change at that point.
Okay, let me respond to that. So let me respond to that. So I think it really depends on how your team is built up. So if you have a small team where you build your own unit tests, yes, I agree that code review should also check the functionality. But if you are in a bigger team where you have a specific tester that really does the functional testing, I don't think you should focus on the unit test itself anymore. It should more be about, is this code readable? Do I understand it? Because developers leave the team and they keep changing, but the code will still be there. So I think reading the code is a very important part of code review.
Yeah, and also the functionality test is very difficult to do from the lines of code itself, most of the time, unless you really understand the code already. But if you're if you have a big team and a lot of code, then it's not possible to know every line of code. And then it's very hard to do code reviews and to check if the function does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, but the thing is that if you don't know about what the code should do, and you're reviewing like only maybe typos, naming, bugs that you maybe spot, then I think it's not that useful for me. I mean, I would like to verify that it's been implemented, that it's been implemented well, of course, but also that it's implemented in. So if you need to make functionality X, that I verify that this is implemented, so that there are not 90% implemented, but that it's 100% implemented. So that you, when you review, you need to know what the assignment of or the use case that was implemented was, not just a syntax check like Sonar does.
I don't agree here. The function is tested by a tester or whatever. The code review is about reviewing the code and not how and not even if it does exactly what it is supposed to be doing.
Well, I hear a lot in this discussion that it's about verifying, like code review as a gatekeeper. And most of the time it's done like that. But the best code reviews I have experienced were really like a dialogue about, does this code make sense? Does this change make sense? Does this commit make sense? Does naming make sense? And really to get into the dialogue, do I understand what's happening here? And then a code review can also be a nice tool to exchange the intent and the knowledge about the change to your peer in the team, to explain what you are doing, what your intent was to do it so, and then it's for me much more fruitful than just having a look in, for example, GitLab, just line by line. Do I agree with this line of code? And for me, that's a very flat review, but really to step back and to understand the code and the change and the idea and the structure is much more learningful experience.
Yeah, I'll just summarize what I think I just heard anyway. Code reviews are more just about, it's not just syntax checking. It's about knowledge transfer we all agree on, but also on technical knowledge, like not just domain, but also the way we code, right? So for example, if you have a new JVM version, you would like to know the new features, and you can see this in a code review as well. But in the same, our value is not just because we type, sorry, should remember to breathe. Our value is also in the domain knowledge we get. And this is really important in code reviews. It's knowledge transfer also on domain knowledge. And that really adds value.
Yeah, I agree as well. I liked earlier it was mentioned about junior, like when you have a new team member. And I remember when I first started that when my senior developer colleague was giving me a review, I was like, well, what can I offer? What can I say? I will just use it as a learning material for myself. And later in my career, that happened again with somebody I really admired. And he's like, you're not helping me. If you are taking long to understand it, that's the feedback you should give me. If you're reading it and it takes too long, you need to tell me, hey, that part, it took me a while, because all the other developers that will come and will read it, like the readability we talked before, they will have to go through this. It's like the minutes it took you, it will take them, and probably even more because it's forgotten code that has been there. So knowledge sharing, but also if you don't understand, that's a sign. If it takes too long, that's a sign.
I think you can also recognize in someone who's reviewing your code if they understand it, if depending on how they review your code, if it's really superficial, really on the style, or only on the naming things, or maybe you could extract this big method, stuff like that. I think that's also a good sign that maybe they don't really understand what you did there. So I think the review is really something about sharing knowledge, teaching someone something else. Of, maybe you could try it like this, and I think that's the most value you get from a code review. The functional changes, I think you should not really address in the code review, but that's something that should be tested. And that's something, if you detect something, of course you can name it, but it shouldn't be the purpose of the code review, in my opinion.
I find it interesting because the sooner you you spot a gap between what was asked and what is coded, the less time and the less money it will cost to correct it. The later in the testing and even if it's not tested well and it gets to an acceptance test stage or even production, the more it will cost to correct. So in a review you can already spot a lot that of more in a different way, of course, but you can, for me, it does a good purpose of saying, okay, is this covering 100% of the use case? But I find it interesting that there are different opinions about that.
Yeah, I agree with you in that sense. What I really feel as well is our code should not just be readable, but it should also reflect our domain. It should be because the developers will leave at a stage, and your business rules should be clear from that. That makes good code, because yes, it's fine if you can read it like a book, but if you don't know where it fits into the entire domain, it doesn't mean anything. And then I just want to ask one question. Who here has more than 5 years of experience of software development? Okay, so then there's one thing that is on all of you. If you're experienced developer, you also have to motivate and encourage your junior developers, sorry. But it's really, code reviews are really good to enforce good techniques, compliment people, tell them, hey, what I saw here is good. And I don't think that's happening enough in our industry anyway.
Well said. No, I forgot what I want to say.
I was... a topic we were discussing earlier is about how you can make pull requests early on in the review process to get feedback, right? I do notice in certain situations when this happens that the quality of the review goes lower the longer you have it open. People sometimes just forget to check, or they just think it's not as much of a priority because it says do not merge. How do you overcome these kind of issues?
I've been in a team where we went, I guess, to the extreme with reviews. We did peer review on every commit we did. And that's along the line. And then there is not being too late to make a change. If something is wrong in the review, you just make a change to your commit before you continue. And well, it was in a time that it was normal to be all in the office, and a peer review of 5 minutes in a commit was not a problem. Working remote, it's more a challenge, but it's every now and then that I'm thinking of the time that the reviews were really compact, concise, clear, and it was just commit by commit by commit. And in the current process in my teams, I see that typically you see the end product of a lot of changes, a lot of commits, and then it becomes hard to understand what the change is about. And if it's just one commit, a refactor or an addition or something removed, a rename, then it's very clear what happened. And then well, that's what what evolves in the team. There is no clear standard on good code. Well, through discussion, by dialogue, you get a common understanding of what is better code and what's lesser code, and just by doing that on each individual commit, well, it's a different way of working, but it really helped me as a junior to learn really fast. Oh, this wasn't a good change, but this is a better change. And the biggest win for me was, as a junior, to do code reviews with the most senior in the team and just ask questions. Hey, why did you choose that name? Oh, well, when you ask it, I could have come up with a better name. And in a moment, it's changed. And so I, as a junior, was helping to find the better form of the code. And for me, it was a really learningful experience. And reacting on making a structural change late in the process, that's painful. Mm-hmm. So if you can really shorten the time of the development and the amount of change you're reviewing, that's a big win.
Yeah, what I heard was also in the beginning, somebody said you need good developers, but like for instance, in the project that I'm on now, there are a lot of seniors, like not really junior people. They all have a certain opinion about, like he said, what's good code. So they all have an opinion, but they're not aligned. It's really hard to align people on what is good code. So you can have maybe something simple like a discussion about how much line should a function be. I mean, I have one person in the team that says, well, maybe 3, maybe 5 lines. Okay, but it's really hard to review on that, or because yeah, for me 10 lines is fine. I mean, I don't see a problem with a function that has 10 lines if it does just the one thing, or. But it's really hard to align these people. If you have more juniors, so then they are maybe more willing to accept the style of that senior that is reviewing. But having seniors like that and then having them review each other, it can be challenging.
Yeah, from my perspective, what I kept hearing here, that your code, length of the code should be small. I totally disagree with it. If we want to be the length to be small, let's decouple the Jira ticket. No, not just, suppose I am doing the first commit. It doesn't cover my functionality. What will the reviewer review? He doesn't know whether the perspective has been covered or not. Even he is reviewing the 4 line is good. But for the second commit, this 4 line doesn't make sense. So what I can say that your pull request should come up with a team rules and regulations. Your team should come up with that a developer should not open a pull request if your sonar coverage is greater than some percentage. In my team, it is a 90%. A developer will not open the pull request unless and until his sonar coverage is 90%. This will also save the time of a reviewer. Reviewer is not going to comment, oh, you have not covered the 90%. In the same way, when we are talking about the functionality, that why should a reviewer test the functionality? We have a test of the IT test case. Suppose a person has written an IT test case and it covers the functionality, but it forgot to add some things which need to be added in the functionality. Yeah, functionality has been covered, but there are always if and buts which are not been covered. So functionality, coverage, syntax, all things need to be covered.
So I think in a remote environment, there might be a place for code reviews a bit earlier, but upon agreement. So what you mentioned earlier, this would, when I open a draft, I'm new or I'm not, I'm working on something that is big and uncertain, I might go through in a sketchy change that does not cover and all things and ask somebody, 1 or 2 specifically, this is a draft PR, I don't want you to go into naming, just tell me, am I going in the right direction? And if I need follow-up, I will specifically ask them, right? So the reviewer is not responsible for the draft PR, I am, and when it reaches the agreements of the team, when it's open to be merged or anything, then I would bring it to, so now I need a proper reviewer that will do everything. I could also never work like what you described. No, I'm not saying it doesn't work. it would be very hard for me the way I approach when I'm making, like sometimes, as I said, I go one round, take the first approach out, and then go over it. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't work. Just wanted to say that it might not fit for everybody.
Yeah, to add to the functionality, same about reviewing the functionality. I think it's, if you're reviewing functionality, then you're too late in the process. If you say, okay, this should have been done differently, or if the functionality should be completely differently, then maybe you should discuss it up front or in an informal session with a senior developer. Just talk about what would be the best approach to make the implementation. Because if you already if you need to do it in the review process and you need to change it, then it will take a lot of time.
Preview process.
In review. Preview, yeah, you need, preview, or maybe preview can already also be too late if you have already written a lot of lines. And if you do, reviews are good for learning, certainly. That's a good aspect, because then developers can also see what's the idea, how you should program and how things fit together, and learn from that, and then from that point build code that looks similar. Especially I was about the senior developers that have different opinions. That's always difficult. I think the developers should be very practical about that and not make too much of a fuss of it.
I would like to respond to the size of the PRs and how complete it must be in regards of the functionality that has to be added. If you can find some parts that are still missing, but you did add some value to the product, I think that's a good time to submit that PR. Because you don't have to fully add everything of the asked functionality. If it's really large and you're gonna get a really large PR with a lot of time being passed and a lot of changes, it's gonna be ever so hard to review that code. And if there's a lot of added functionality, you should try to cut that up and make smaller changes that add value over time. So you can keep going and you don't have the PR open for a long time. I would still like to make one short comment about reviewing every commit. I think you guys should go mob programming and not disrupt someone else's work to look at my code, I made a commit. I think that's really, I don't think that's efficient, but that's just a random remark.
I have an interesting story regarding this senior developer, junior developer review comments. We have many colleagues here who have been working in the code review sites. What is the worst and annoying code review comment have you ever received? Yeah, something similar like that. Yes, I will tell you an incident. It was around 4 or 5 years ago. It was my first, I can say, a pull request in that company. More or less, it is not the current company. So that was like, I have documented a public class. It was a Java doc. And the comment was, please give a space after comma.
I would like to reply to the ongoing theme of functionality being in the review or not. I think ideally it's not, but the real world is going to be messy, and there are going to be times where you get a review and the functionality is going to be wrong. And I'd rather have you point it out instead of saying, whoops, too late, we're already in the review. So to me, it's very important to also, like, are we actually building any value here, or we're just reviewing it to look pretty, right?
I still want to respond to the length of the pull request. There's this famous tweet, I think, where people say a commit of 10 lines. Well, this is not so fine. A commit of 10,000 lines. Okay, accepted. So something like that, because the size really, really matters. It should be not too long to be able to do a good review.
The thing we do is we don't allow PRs more than 40 hours estimated work. Otherwise, it starts to be split and reviewed separately. So it's 40 hours. Yeah, that's a lot. I agree. Yeah, but it could be even worse. Trust me.
If I can add on also about the functionality, because if you know everything up front, you also don't give room for junior developers to figure out how to make this functionality work for themselves. And I think paying attention to that in the pull review will also let them try out things instead of being told how to do it. If that makes sense.
I like to react on pull request of 40 hours of work. I would say if you spend a day of work, it's time to find a check with a peer to know you're on the right track.
Just 40 hours of pull request is a bad planning. Scrum Master need to be changed.
To react to the functionality, of course, the junior developers need to have the freedom. I'm not saying that you should not check the functionality in the code, but you're too late in the process if you need to give feedback. Okay, you need to completely redo this. So in that case, it's better for the junior developer or the senior developer to actively communicate with the developer from, okay, how should I approach this implementation, and then discuss that up front, and then build it. And certainly if you have new developers, you can let them flounder around and, okay, you just build it, and then we see in the review how it's done. Most of the time probably developers don't have enough time to do one-on-one discussions, so it can be a hard learning process, I guess, if you in the review say, okay, start over again because this is completely wrong. But
I'd like to respond to the long pull requests and to the 10,000 okay accepted. I think there's also a point of human bias, right? Where if you're in a review and it's quite a long review, and you've already given a lot of comments, you feel sorry for that person. You don't want to be that person because like he has so much work to do. And then I feel like you let more slide also. Because you're like, yeah, this is not ideal, but I already have 120 comments waiting for him. Like, so that's on the long comments as well.
Yes, but sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, because if you do a refactor where you rename a method or something like that, and it is being used all over the code, it will be a huge commit anyway. So then it's a matter of, am I going to review all the commands, the complete commit, or not? I see some newcomers. That's great. So everybody who hasn't been on the stage here yet, you are not really part of the discussion, right? So please continue.
I would also like to react on the pull request, which requires more than 40 hours. Did I hear that right?
No, max. And it's not only coding, that's what I want to say.
Coding and pull request?
Not only everything, sorry. So this pull request of 40 hours, there's a lot of comments on that. That's including everything, not only coding, but the preview process, it has to be previewed first, it has to be coded, it has to be documented, it has to be tested, everything. So it's not, but it's I still agree it's a lot.
I don't know, maybe we are in different worlds, but I'm doing transaction processing, like 1,000 millions of transactions a year. A quite big project with, well, you know, thousands of lines. We try to split our work in an agile way. We try to split it in small chunks, which can be rolled back if any insight is changed in the time the process is taking. So we don't want any job to take longer than a week. So having said that, a pull request of more than, say, 4 hours sounds so strange to me. Yeah.
What I hear everybody talking about reviewing pull requests on your own.
what I'm missing is doing pair programming. What we do is when it's, especially with the junior developers, we first say, okay, explain the structure, then they get some time to work on their own, and then we work together to see how to continue and give them tips to work to a better solution.
Well, like your way of working, I think pair programming has its own place. Some teams only do pair programming. I think that doesn't work for all developers. I'm included. I like to do it for maybe 2 or 3 hours a day, but then my brain is drained. But what I also thought, as soon as I do a pull request review and I've written, I think the edge is somewhere between 10 and 20 comments. If I'm at that point and I haven't reached the end of the code, I talk to the person. I feel like at that point there's a gross mismatch between what you think should be the code and what they've created. So that's really like, yeah. I think at about 10 comments I already tend to ask
I was
for.
exaggerating a little, but I have a question for everyone here, I guess. Can you do a proper pull request without checking out the source code? In my opinion, no. But I'm wondering what your takes on it are.
That's a good one. I think normally in most teams, no. But sometimes if you have a really good pipeline in place with really different levels of testing, and you read the tests that were added to test the new functionality, and you think about them, do they convey what the code should do, then I don't think you need to have it checked out on your machine, because you've got your pipeline to verify, well, everything you want it to do.
So I'd like to react to the functional correctness of what you have built, and if that's part of the code review. We talked about it a little bit. I'm used to working agile. I don't know who works agile here. Most people, really? Okay. Who doesn't work agile? Maybe. Okay, so continue. So one of the things about agile working is that you have the 4I principle, right? At least each task is contributed or checked by some person. So also the implementation. And for the implementation, the check is the code review, right? So functional correctness of what you need to build is part of the code review for me.
I agree with that. And sometimes in our company we do cross-team reviews, and sometimes you get a piece of code. I work at the bank, and then that's very hard to concentrate on functional correctness. But then I also always say, okay, I cannot say if it's functional correct, but I can say, is the structure correct? Are the test coverage and stuff like that? But just mention that you don't check it.
I wanted to go back to the comments, if that's okay. That we said, like, after a while you feel sorry, and it took me a while. And well, when you give, that's a show of hands, when you put so many comments, and they're not like put a space or something, they're actual comments to improve the code. Is that a good feeling that you have, or if you receive it, or is it bad? Well, yeah. Where I'm going with this, for me in the beginning it felt like, oh, I failed, you know. On the other hand, there is so much better this code could be, right? So they're not always bad if you have a lot of comments. Again, the quality of the comments matters. But sometimes when we said earlier, what is the worst? If it's a big PR that I did and I get looks good to me, then for me that is that either it was too big or I'm not that perfect. I feel there can be better, so we need to take a look at that.
Something, if you have a lot of comments, then you're inspired by the code you see to give the feedback. So that sometimes it's a good sign.
Yeah.
Maybe it's also good to have, like with the corona, being remote also gives, you can't sit next to each other, which makes it, I think, a more sterile
We have teams, for example, that
But still, you can't. Yeah, you can put on the camera, but mostly you share the screen. And if you don't see each other, it can still have some friction with people. Like, of course, that depends on the person who receives it and how the person that reviews it brings it. But still, yeah, sitting next to each other can have a better effect, in my opinion.
Yeah, you should be very careful also how you word the comments you give to somebody else. Yeah.
By the way, about sitting next to each other, how would you like to sit here?
I have a different question. How many people do consider multiple PRs, for example, from one Jira task they are doing? Who is doing like more than 2 or more than 1 PR? Almost nobody. Because that can easily, for example, do a PR for refactoring only naming, for example, or like easily to approve. Do another PR and merge into developer master. Do another one for the real implementation. Okay, you can be very agile on sending the PR and getting it approved and doing the next functional change. That will really ease up my time and be not like bothered for a long while.
Yes. I was just going to say that because it's close to the end of the session, so I think it's time to wrap up. I want to ask Mary to come with a conclusion.
I don't know how you felt it, but for me it was a lively discussion. There were definitely some hot topics on what is. Like what are the priorities when you review, the size of the review, and all these other things. I liked it very much. I think we should align a bit more with our teammates because every environment is different. Not everything works for everybody. Maybe that's why it's such a difficult topic. What do you think?
Yes, probably, yes. I really like the interaction. So we had quite some switches over here. It could be more, but I think for the first time, this wasn't that bad. So I would like to say, like in Dutch, we say, applausje voor jezelf.